The following podcast may be disturbing to those who support hatred, terrorism, anti-Semitism, and discrimination. Viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to How We Fought Against. And I have a friend, a colleague, an amazing woman that I've known for years, but I keep on following her work, and I find it groundbreaking and fascinating. Her name is Raheel Raza. She's a leading global voice against Islamist extremism, which she really is. And she has published books and done movies and interviews, and she travels all over the world to speak, and she's an amazing voice to kind of, let's say, make us all understand better the difference between Islam or Muslims and radical Islam or Islamism, as she calls it. And this is, I think, a celebratory event because she's also issued her latest book, which is called The ABCs of Islam, everything you wanted to know about radical Islam, but were afraid to ask. I think that's a very accurate title. Raheel, thank you so much for being with us today. Hi, how are you?
I'm great. It's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure both to see you after so long and to be able to chat with you about my newest book.
So, Raheel, just if people don't know, and I advise you all to go and read a little bit about Raheel and what she has done. But for people who don't know, you were born in Pakistan and immigrated to Canada about 30 years ago.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, that's true.
And you've been really a leading voice in an issue that has been so controversial, not necessarily for the right reasons, maybe for the wrong reasons, but it has been so controversial. And I know that you have received a lot of criticism from human rights activists, from people in Canada and other places in the world that fight for liberalism, but they've actually chose to criticize you for your voice and the work that you do. So would you help us kind of first and foremost understand what's the difference between Islam and Islamism, as you call it, or radical Islam?
Well, thank you for asking that key question. And by the way, I love the title of your podcast. It's about, fighting against an issue that you feel passionate about. And I think you could encapsulate my work to say that, my entire adult life, I've been fighting against radicalization of my faith. Islam is a faith like Judaism and Christianity. It is a spiritual message. In its spiritual message, it's non-threatening. It is a message that was, given 1400 years ago. So obviously, there is a historical context there. Islamism, on the other hand, is a political ideology, which uses no spiritual message, but only politics to further the agenda of the people who are promoting. And, at times it takes a violent turn because, they tend to promote their ideology sometimes through violent actions. But it can be both subtle and overt. And this is something that I have seen in my lifetime. If I grew up, as you said, I was born in Pakistan. I grew up in a country and an Islam that was very pluralistic. It wasn't what we see today. And so in my lifetime, and I age myself when I say that, I've seen how my faith has been stolen. It has been hijacked and then reproduced as something ugly for the world to see. And my battle has been to separate the spiritual message of my faith from the political message and to help people understand that this political ideology is a virus. It is dangerous, it is threatening, it is violent. It is like fascism, it is like Marxism, it is like communism. But when these existed in the world, every leader stood up, every country stood up and spoke out against it and said, this is not right. But when it's Islamism, our leaders especially are afraid to speak out because they can't separate the two. So the purpose of my book was to be able to help people, first of all, understand what radical Islam and Islamism looks like, because it comes in many varieties, in many colors, and it has many agendas. It's not just one thing that you can pinpoint. To say that ISIS is radical Islam or Islamism is not enough, because it has a very non-violent personality as well. Now, it emanates a lot from the playbook of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
And let me give you a little bit of a historical context. It is a rather recent phenomenon. When Khomeini was in France, he was fascinated by the manifesto of the Muslim Brotherhood. So instead of reading French philosophers, I believe that's what he was reading. So when he came back to Iran, that was in his mind. He was influenced by this. And one of the influencers was a Pakistani cleric by the name of Maududi, who is an Islamist to the core and who actually promoted the Pakistani version of the Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, the founder, Hassan al-Banna. So Khomeini started implementing what the Muslim Brotherhood agenda was, and he said he was going to export the revolution. You remember, this is the big thing. Now, Saudi Arabia, which is more Wahhabi in their understanding, Wahhabism is a very orthodox, very hardcore interpretation of Islam. They thought, well, this is going to be, Khomeini is going to promote the Shia version. So they immediately implemented billions of dollars to promote their agenda. And this is where Islamism started arriving into the West. And, it is a very unholy alliance because, for the Sunni world, this became the Saudi agenda. And for the Shias, it became the Khomeini agenda. And we call it Khomeiniism, just like we say Wahhabism.
Mm-hmm.
And, these are isms which have very little to do with what the core message of the faith was, and has taken on a totally political manifestation. Now, one of the manifestos of the Muslim Brotherhood, and this is not my words, it is part of their mandate, is that the West is evil, it has to be destroyed, and it has to be destroyed from within. Now, when we see these subtle infiltration of the Islamists into the Western world, and thanks to our leaders also on invitation, that's exactly what they're doing. You have people like Ilhan Omar in the United States who openly speaks of her anti-US, of her anti-Israel agenda. And for me, as a lover of Israel, as you know, I've been there 13 times, and a supporter of Israel and an outspoken advocate against anti-Semitism, I have also got a chapter in my book which speaks about how anti-Semitism is a purely Islamist agenda.
Yeah. So, Raheel, how do you, I think my issue oftentimes is that people will not engage in conversation at all. There is black, there is white, shut up about it. It's Islamophobia. I don't want to hear it. Like they start acting like, artistic a little bit. And on the other side, there are people who say, you should treat the immigrants in a certain way, or, people that go off on the other direction. So if this was a normal world, we could have engaged in conversation and together, maybe jointly as a society, try to understand where the line should be. But what is your view? Where is the line should be? Because there are obviously a lot of Muslims in Western countries, and a lot more immigrants are coming. Maybe will continue to come in the future years. Where should the line be crossed in your eyes?
You are so right. You see, the biggest challenge, even for me, is finding that line, that middle path, because it's always the extremes. The two extremes, one that say that I'm not Muslim enough, and the others that say, I'm too much of a Muslim. So yes, I agree with you that these are conversations we should have been having a long time ago. And trust me, when 9/11 happened, one of the first things my organization and people, like-minded people like us, said is we have to talk. We must have roundtable discussions. We have to, go to the root of where this is coming from. Because it's not just finding the terrorists who have done the attacks. We have to go to the root, find out what the ideology is. This is not a war of weapons. This is a war of ideas. I think the biggest issue here is this, that people tend to think that, this is something that it is a normal war. It isn't. It's a war of ideas. And we need to have bigger and better ideas, and we need to sit and talk to each other, absolutely. But we don't do that because there is fear, there is insecurity, and there is a lot of ignorance. So, people tend to be black and white. Again, part of the reason I wrote this book is so that it can help people understand that if they criticize certain issues within the Muslim world, from honor killings to blasphemy to implementation of Sharia laws to women's rights, all of these are part of this political agenda called Islamism. And like any other citizen of any country, it is okay to talk about it. It is kosher to talk about it. And we must talk about it. So, some of the best work that I have done has been when I have sat with people of other faith, because then we can, dialogue. And that dialogue is not happening. And recently, with the rise of all these movements, in the West, especially, I'm sure you must have been watching, there is this culture of not being able to speak out, political correctness. You've got organizations like Antifa saying, you can't say that. People have been afraid. So whatever little conversation we used to have, it's also been crushed. Very important to have this conversation. So I want people to be able to open the book and say, hey, blasphemy. I thought blasphemy was a part of Islam. Let's talk about it. I think it's really important that people ask the hard questions. And that is what I'm trying to help them to do, is to look at this and say, I can talk about this. We can ask these questions, and we should be able to ask these questions. I've never shied away from that. It doesn't become a personal slur against me if somebody asks me, this is part of the Quran. How do you interpret this? How do you read this? I mean, I'm not a scholar, but I've done my research and my experience of being able to talk. But again, coming back to what you say, people don't talk. They just make statements.
Yeah. So we have, I think, it would be easier to classify, you've mentioned honor killings or female gender mutilation, these horrible practices that were imported into the Western countries with the big wave of immigration. So I think it's easy to, to draw the line there, because you say, well, there's an actual physical violent crime. Honor killing is actual murder, and mutilation, well, it's mutilation. Obviously, it's a crime, and Western societies have their law books and they should enforce it. But then it gets, I think, a little bit harder, like you were speaking about blasphemy. So, I mean, you can find in the Christian world, in the Jewish world, people are appalled by criticisms made on, I don't know, Jesus, whoever you want to choose. But it never goes, or almost never goes, at least not in the recent few centuries, to the point of actually justifying, violence, death, murder, executions, etc. But what happens? I mean, I assume that they, whether online or in the mosques, they cross the line somehow. So would you define how you see them cross? Where do you see them crossing the line in that sense?
Well, anytime violence comes into the picture, you've crossed the line. See, any kind of even very active debate and discussion of, what it is that we're talking about is fine. But unfortunately, you see in all these cases, you see it in the cases of blasphemy, of apostasy, which is Muslims leaving the faith. There are clerics who say that they should be killed, but that's not part of the message of the Quran being the holy scripture of Muslims. We have a verse that says, to you your faith, to me mine. There should be no compulsion in religion. But they bypass that. They ignore that. So crossing the line is when people, I think, in the case of Muslims, is when they start misinterpreting the scripture, and when they move towards violence and justify it by saying that it is allowed. Now, I'll give you a simple example, and this is one of the chapters in my book, is the term jihad, right? Now, we talk about armed jihad, and I've explained that in the 7th century, there were tribes. These were absolutely barbaric tribes. I mean, they were barbaric. If a camel from one tribe crossed over into another territory, the swords would be drawn. That is the only way they knew how to deal with each other, through violence, through war, through fighting, through killing. There were no security councils or nation states. This was tribal. So what we are saying is that we need to leave the concept of armed jihad behind in the 7th century. We have this virtual parking lot, and we're saying, okay, park it there. It's no longer applicable in the 21st century because now we have nation states, we have leaders, and we need to have communication. And perhaps one of the best examples and hope for the future is the recognition today of Israel by some Muslim countries. And I see that that is creating that dialogue, that is creating change within those countries in the acceptance of Israel and in the initial visits back and forth, like the United Arab Emirates. Now, I've lived in the United Arab Emirates for 8 years before coming to Canada, so I know what the philosophy there was, and they're changing.
Yeah.
You see, they're changing because now they're in dialogue, and they're realizing that in order for there to be peace, there has to be equal respect for the other partner, for the other side. And even despite people having problems, let's say, with some of the issues of, say, the Israeli government or any other government, talk about it.
Yeah.
You have to recognize the entity, and then you have to sit around a table and talk. It's like a family. If we each go into our own silos and constantly criticize each other and want to kill each other for every aberration, there will never be peace. So peace only comes through dialogue and through being able to openly question, critique. Criticism is a very healthy thing. I'm very open to criticism about actions of my co-religionists. I'm very open to criticism about what is happening in my faith because it allows us to have that dialogue. Yes. So it is important, but we, again, as I said, for me, the line is when it refers to violence, any kind of violence.
Even preaching for violence or just justifying violence or glorifying violence?
Glorifying violence, preaching violence, teaching violence, implementing violence, because violence is never a solution. You know that there are textbooks in some Muslim countries where they're teaching hatred. And for me, another defining line is hate. See, so when you teach hate by the way, that's a chapter in the book as well. Mm-hmm. I've talked a lot about the root causes of Islamism. Where does it emanate from? And as far as I'm concerned, one of the root causes of the violence is hate, because through hate, you dehumanize another, and then it's okay to implement violence against them. Just imagine for a moment, how can you encourage young people, youth, to pick up a gun or to pick up a bomb and hurt another person in this day and age? It's only through hate. You brainwash them to the extent that they hate so much that they're able to justify the violence.
So that's an interesting topic, and I've thought a lot about it, I have to tell you, because the explanation that I once gave to someone was, for example, I went to law school and I spent years studying. I would much rather be at the beach or do something else. But the reason that I've done that is that I've sacrificed time and energy for a better future, or at least that's what I thought. So and I think for very religious people, whether it's Islam or Judaism or any other religion, they are willing to make that sacrifice in this life in order to get, an eternity of their divine presence in heaven and next to Allah and, whatever religion you want to refer to. So when you say that it's a political, that it comes from the political element of Islam, and you kind of separate it from the actual religious sentiment. So how is it really that mixed up? Are they not saying I'm going to blow myself up because tomorrow I get to sit in heaven next to Allah?
Yes, of course they're saying that. And not only that, they think they're going to get 72 virgins at their beck and call, because that is what they have been given as an invitation, which is such a bunch of baloney. But you're right. And so Islamism is political ideology, but with a very Islamic flavor. The way that these young people are radicalized is by telling them that this is what your faith wants to do, because the Islamists truly believe that their version and interpretation of Islam is the true Islam. And this is a huge problem. It's a huge challenge because I can't say that my interpretation of Islam is the true version. Everybody has a choice to make their own understanding. But the blame falls definitely on the teachers, on the clergy, on the religious leadership that are teaching the young kids this. And, I've often questioned that if suicide bombing was such a great thing, why doesn't the clergy go and do it themselves? Why are they teaching and brainwashing young people to say, this is your religious right. You will go to heaven if you kill yourself. They don't read the Quran, which says you cannot take your life. Taking your life is a sin, just like it is in Judaism and Christianity. It is not, it's not even a gray area. It's clearly black and white. But they brainwash these young people. And there is ignorance. You have to understand that these are not young people or older people who have picked up the literature or have picked up the scripture and try to understand for themselves, where do I stand on this? Is it right or is it wrong? They are just brainwashed because the religious clergy holds so much power in the Muslim world that they are considered demigods.
Mm-hmm.
They could be the most ignorant person. It could be the village idiot. But if they hold the position of mullah, of the religious cleric, they are powerful. So one of the downfalls of large parts of the uneducated Muslim world is a combination of power, patriarchy, and politics. And in Islamism, which is the political ideology, there's a very strong flavor of what they want to implement through a religious lens. Absolutely, it is done in that sense. Yeah. So they will justify anything from honored killings to suicide bombings, to jihad, to armed jihad. They justify it by misinterpreting the scripture. And that's easy to do because if you take one line out of context without any historical context, it becomes very easy to do.
Right. So, if you look at yourself, right, you're a Muslim woman, God forbid, look at you, you speak out, you travel the world. I mean, that is horrible. According to, the let's say the more common interpretation of Islam, right?
Yes. There's nothing that terrifies them more than an independent, articulate Muslim woman who speaks her mind. So I walk around, with a target on my forehead. As you know, I have a death threat, fatwa. If they can't implement the physical violence against me, then they try to threaten through lawsuits. It is a way of trying to shut me up. But Yifa, here's the thing. At my age, the only way I'll shut up is when I'm 6 feet under. So the more they threaten me, the more they challenge me, the more I speak out. Yeah. Because I want them, like anyone else, to be able to sit across a table from me and say, you are wrong. I want them to be able to prove that what I'm saying is wrong, that there shouldn't be violence, that women should have equal rights. I know this because I've studied, what it is in reality. So I work from within the faith because they have been radicalized through the faith. So I need to de-radicalize them through the faith as well.
So who issued a fatwa against you?
Oh, a very prominent cleric in Saudi Arabia. Read the book.
Oh, wow.
F for fatwa.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Congratulations. I think that's that's quite an achievement.
An honor.
That's quite an achievement.
Yes.
I mean, yeah.
I was reading some author who said that if you've never been criticized in the world, then you haven't really done anything worthwhile.
Yeah, it's true.
So, the criticism and the lashback against me does two things. One, it keeps me humble. It keeps my ego very, very humble. And that's important. And secondly, it just spurs me on to speak out more. Because the fact that the Islamists are perturbed by what I'm saying means that it's getting under their skin.
Yeah.
and they don't have the wherewithal to, as I said, to sit face to face and discuss these things, because I think in their hearts of hearts, they know that they're wrong.
So you think that equality of men and women is also a part of Islam, or this is some kind of a reform version of Islam more suited for the 20th century, for 21st
In
century?
the core teachings of Islam, Yifa, when Islam came as a message 1400 years ago, people don't realize that Prophet Muhammad's first wife sent a proposal of marriage to him. She was a businesswoman. He used to work for her. I'm talking about role models that even Muslims don't know about. I mean, his daughter was a absolutely fascinating speaker. When he received the revelation, he would pass it on to his wife and daughter, and then she would, pass that on. And these were strong women. So, he did housework. And so the role models are there in the sense that, yes, I mean, again, you're talking about the 7th century, where the norm before Islam was to bury newborn girls alive. Right. So you have to look at the atmosphere in which this message came.
Yeah.
And when this message came, it came as a revolutionary message. It said that women are allowed to keep their married names. They are allowed to participate in war. They have equal rights in terms of, voting, if there was such a thing at that time. And in the early centuries, there were calligraphers and poets and judges. This Islamism recent phenomena has curbed the voices of women. And ask me why. You should know the answer to that. Because once women get equal rights and they start speaking out and they are given their full power, the whole dynamic will change. This is where the change will come. But I'm glad to tell you that there has been change. Women who got so tired of the mosque being a men's club and of being totally patriarchally, controlled by men, they started opening their own mosques.
Really?
Yes. So here's the interesting thing.
In the Middle East?
No, not in the Middle East. This is in the West.
In the West.
In Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But you know what? I think it's only a matter of time. Actually, in India, there was a group of women in a rural village who were so fed up of the men running the thing. They just put 4 walls and built a mosque of their own and called it a women's mosque, because fortunately, that's all they need. It's just a room, is a space. More and more women are performing marriages like, a religious cleric, which was also by the men forbidden. So that change is coming. After 1400 years, women are interpreting the Quran.
Wow.
And they're looking at the verses in the Quran, which supposedly have been misused to promote violence against women, because of course it was always interpreted and translated by men.
Yeah.
So now the women said, hey, there's nothing that says that we can't do it. Of course, it's against a lot of backlash, but they are picking it up and they're doing it. There are more women who are imams.
Wow.
You wouldn't have heard about this 10 years ago. So that change is coming. As I said, when women realize their power, the power given to them by the faith, within the faith, they start bringing about change. But of course, it's a combination of third world countries with poverty, with illiteracy. The biggest push for madrasas, for example, and turning young boys into warriors is in these countries where there is illiteracy, where there is total, economic disparity. So, for example, the Islamists will go to a family and say, hey, you have 5 kids, we'll take 3 and we'll feed them and clothe them and educate them. What do they mean by that? Is that they'll tie them with a chain in a madrasa and brainwash them. And that is how the Taliban were created.
Yeah.
The word Taliban actually means student. And, the Talib were students who were brainwashed into this Wahhabi ideology, and it is promoted on the backs of violence. So there is a huge problem, of course, of Islamism, but people need to recognize what it is, where it's coming from, and how we can deal with it.
Yeah. So I want to, before we finish, I want to ask you something that for me is very interesting, and it's more like a philosophic question to do with liberalism.
Yeah.
So, okay, so as far as I'm concerned, I'm a very liberal person, and but as far as I'm concerned, if you come into my house and you stay as a guest or even as a permanent resident or citizen in my house, then I have my rules. If you are if you're used to painting on your walls in your own house, that's very cool. I mean, you can do that. But when you come into my house, please don't paint on the walls. It's my house. This is my rule. So it's easier for me to accept the fact that when people are asking to enter and join my house, my society, then they should understand these are the rules. I mean, you don't have to like it. It's not necessarily universal, better than anything else, but this is my house, my rules. So let's come together and that's fine. But what do we do when, because we also look at the Middle East and we look at other, Muslim countries, and we say, all this, the discrimination, the violence, the jihad, we have some issues with that. So how do you settle that? How do you settle that with looking at it from a liberal point of view?
That's an excellent question, Yifa, and it is also, I keep on coming back. I have addressed this in the book where I've talked about how the mass immigration in the last decade has affected the rise of Islamism. It is a very real fact. And I have, this quotation you gave about your house is something that I've always said, that, we invite guests into our house, but if our guests want to rearrange the furniture, we would have a problem with that. So integration of new immigrants into a Western society, their understanding of what they are coming to, their acceptance of the laws of the land in which they live are all very important factors. Unfortunately, it comes back to what we had talked about. Nobody talks about this. So let me give you an example of Canada. We have huge numbers of immigrants coming here, many of them coming from Muslim lands as well. And don't get me wrong, some of them are very successful, they settle, they integrate, but of course there's always a portion that is still brainwashed with the ideology that was taught to them back home. And nobody gives them a brochure or a piece of paper that tells them before they come that You're coming to a country where women and men are equal. You're coming to a country where we respect LGBTQ rights. You're coming to a country where liberal democracy is extremely important, where we have separation of church and state. You're not coming to an Islamic country. Nobody tells them that. And I think this is important. For years, we've been lobbying with our government to say that before somebody comes, not afterwards,
right?
Before someone comes, let them understand where they're coming and what they're coming to, and how they need to give and take and respect. Nobody's asking them to give up their culture, their values, their faith, nothing. This is where the beauty of freedom of religion lies. But you're coming into a country, your house, as you said, you need to understand what the rules are. And if you don't like that, then this is not the place for you.
Yeah.
So you can't come here and then try to implement your own laws, to try and force what I call unreasonable accommodation. And Canadians are so giving, so willing to accommodate people that sometimes, it just crosses the line. You use the term, cross the line, they do. So they'll push for unreasonable accommodation when everything is equal. And most importantly, in terms of gender, that is something that bothers me when I see honor killings taking place in Western society. You realize that person, that father who has killed his daughter, has never acknowledged or understood what the values of the Western world are. But then it goes back to the mandate of the Muslim Brotherhood. Many of these people have been brainwashed into believing that Western values are bad, that Western values are wrong. Well, then don't come here. So the question then arises, why do they come? They come because within the freedoms that we offer them in the Western world, they are able to pursue their agendas. Try doing some of the stuff that they're doing here in Iran. They would be killed. Yeah. Try doing it in Saudi Arabia. They would be beheaded. Try doing it in Pakistan, where I come from. So they know that they have the freedoms here to do it. And they also understand that our leaders are sort of asleep at the wheel and too polite to say, hey, don't walk in a full-clad face to toe covering. It's not part of the culture here. So respect the culture.
So you would outlaw burqas and hijab?
Yifa burqa in my book, yes. The first sentence in that chapter says we should ban the burqa.
Really?
So I got a lot of backlash for that.
Wow.
But yes, I do. Again, it's an Islamist symbol. Now, I grew up in Pakistan. We would wear a loose scarf over our head when we prayed, or I've seen Jewish women cover their hair. I've seen Christian women cover their hair. But this particular form of face covering for the whole entire thing is a very Islamist construct. Keep the women hidden, keep them covered so that they don't have a voice, that they can't be equal partners. And, we'll continue to do whatever we do. So the gender disparity and the imposition of these unfair laws against women is something that we're trying to pick up now and promote in terms of what needs to be done.
Amazing. So just to finish off with, would you also preach to change that, those customs, let's say, in countries that are not Western, that are not your home?
Yes. I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. Would I preach what?
To change those practices in other countries that are not your home, that are like, in Saudi Arabia, in other countries.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And the change in Saudi Arabia is coming. They have started to allow women to drive. We, of course, want these changes. You see, in the West, it's very easy to do what you want. And this is what the freedom of the West is. But the real change has to come in Muslim majority countries. The real change has to be implemented there. And Saudi Arabia is, to some extent, not all, setting an example by opening allowing some of these freedoms. I just read, much to my amusement, just yesterday I was reading that in the United Arab Emirates, which now, there's open traffic between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, they're saying that, men and women can cohabitate, they can be seen together. Now, these were very Saudi type of restrictions. They're lifting the restrictions on alcohol, so whatever change is coming, obviously this is what we're looking at. But if it's something that helps women and women's rights, because women are the ones who are going to be front and center in bringing about the real reform within the Muslim world, because they are the ones who bring up the boys. They're the ones who are educators, and they are the ones, the nurturers of the children. Yeah. So it's important that they be educated. And this has been our focus, even in third world countries, is educate the women.
Wow. Well, I'm so sorry we ran out of time. This was fascinating. It's always fascinating. I miss you so much. This was so great. It was so great to speak to you. I want to tell everybody again, the ABCs of Islam, run and buy the book. We're going to put the link to Amazon on right below this chapter here so everyone can have an easy access. And follow us on How We Fought Against and see when the next chapter is coming up. Thank you everyone for joining. Raheel, thanks so much.
Thank you, Yifa. You take care, and I hope to see you this year. For sure.
I hope so. From the bottom of my heart.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.